Okay, welcome everyone. I am Brittany from the Idaho Wheat Commission, do communications and grower education, and we are joined today for our From the Field by Carol Jones, who is going to be talking to us about grain storage safety on the farm. So it's stuff we all know, but it's really easy to get complacent and then things happen. So we are trying to reduce your liability and then also definitely reduce instances of accidents on the farm. So Carol, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself, and before you do that, I'll remind anyone that's on that they can go ahead and ask questions. Please do. You can type that into the chat, or you can unmute your microphone or raise your hand using the icons at the bottom. So go ahead, Carol.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to provide this information today. It's just a pleasure and a real privilege. I know that you're in the middle of harvest. We just finished harvest and we'll start sowing wheat again next week. So it's a really busy time of year. So that makes this topic even more important because now it's a risky time for all of us. My background is in the wheat industry. I'm a farm girl from Northwest Oklahoma. So we raise a lot of hard red winter wheat. Along with a few other things, cattle and some hay. So we were diversified, but I went on to Oklahoma State University and got my degree in agricultural engineering, and that was about 100 years ago. So I went out and worked. Of course, Oklahoma, you got to do your time in the oil field, and I did that for a little bit, and then had the opportunity to go back home and run my family's farming operation for a few years, which I still have some management responsibilities there, but Oklahoma State University asked me if I wanted to come back and work as an engineer in their ag engineering department and get my PhD. So I did that and found a great opportunity in post-harvest technology and grain storage, and they just kept me on as a professor. So I semi-retired from there now after about 25 years of working there at the university. Best place in the world to work, had a great job. But the part that I really enjoyed of my job was extension work more than research. So now I'm able to do that extension work with the university. And then I also have a consulting company where I work with companies on grain storage, aeration management, equipment to keep your grain in better condition, safety equipment, a lot of safety training. And then I do some expert witness work when things go wrong. That's not my favorite part of my job. So we want to make sure that I don't have to work as an expert witness for any of you all. That's our goal today. The ag industry, particularly farming, wheat farming, corn farming, any of the grain farms, is the 6th most dangerous occupation in the United States, has been for years. Some of the statistics even say that farming in general is number 2 as far as being dangerous, and that's only behind mining. So it's not new news to any of you that we do some really dangerous work. And to compound that, if we're family farms, we have children around with us also. And so that makes, that pulls even more heartstrings and can devastate a family so quickly when the accident includes one of our children. So we want to talk about some ways today that may help you to prevent these accidents around your grain storage facilities. And we're going to tie that in with grain quality because they are closely married. If your grain is in good condition, it goes in the bin easily, it stores fairly well, you're never going to improve the quality. It's the best quality it's ever going to have coming right out of the field. You can increase its value by doing some things to it, marketing at the right time, blending it, turn it into feed. But the quality of that grain is the best it's ever going to be coming right out of the field. So if we can maintain that quality through the storage, then it'll come back out of the bin easily. We don't have clumping. We don't have anything stuck to the walls of the bin. We don't have the bridging that happens a lot with corn. Those things don't happen if we keep grain in good condition. So we find that our workers become entrapped most often when they're unloading the crop that's been in storage for the season and they're getting ready to clean that bin out for the next season. Time to market. Our grain's been in the bin maybe 8-9 months. It's been through the winter. We've had snow maybe blow in on it. There's all kinds of things that happen in our bins, particularly on the farm through the storage season. So we get some clumping. Maybe it sticks to the side of the steel bin. Maybe you're unloading and all of a sudden nothing's coming out the auger, and you look inside and it looks like you haven't unloaded anything. Just looks like you've not done anything. Well, that tells you that there is a void in there. You've unloaded, but yet there is a ledge, a bridge, so to speak, over that top surface. And so that's going to have to be broken up for it to go out the reclaim system or the unloading auger. So our workers go in to do these things, break up the clumps, maybe chip away at that's hung up on the walls. Maybe they step down on that bridge that we just talked about. And that's when we have our entrapments. And that's so sad. But that's directly related to the quality of your grain. So if you're able to keep your grain in good condition, those kind of things don't happen. So as you go into harvest, or you're in harvest right now, you're in the first step of this whole cycle of safety in a facility. So putting grain in the best conditions you possibly have. I don't know about Idaho. This year we had a really dry summer. So ours went into the bin pretty dry. In fact, we're almost too dry here. So we should be able to store it fairly well through the year. Wheat is one of the easiest ones to store. We're very fortunate if wheat is what you're handling. The corn people, milo, sometimes soybeans, those are the ones we really have even more problems handling, because they go into the bin in a higher moisture content. We may have to even run them through a dryer. So that's some more complexities you have to deal with. But in the wheat industry, we're going to put it in the bin 11%, maybe 12%, and it's going to store pretty well as long as you keep the moisture out of your bin. So before you put your product in the bin, make sure you do a walkthrough and catch any of those bolts that are missing in your steel bins. Make sure the drawer is sealed pretty well. Anything that could let moisture in, have some kind of a plan to monitor or to close it. Parts of Idaho I know get a lot of snow. We don't feel your pain like that here in Oklahoma. But I have had calls from Idaho and on north that they looked into their bin in the springtime and it looked like a golf course on the top of surface because it had sprouted. So that indicated that maybe some snow had blown in and they didn't remedy the problem at the time. So monitoring is so critical throughout the year. You can do that with just by looking in. If your bin facility is such that you can look in at that top surface, that's a good thing. If you have temperature cables, kudos to you. That is a very good communication tool between you and your grain. You can watch the little nodes on the temperature cables, and if you see one of them rising where the rest of them are not, that tells you there's a bad place in your bin. It's starting to mold and get insects in it. And that's a good time to sell that bin, even if maybe it's not the best time of the year to do that. You're only going to have more problems. You can mix it, you can move it to another bin. Sometimes breaking up that hot spot and then putting it back in the bin works, but the moisture that caused that hot spot is still there. So you've got to get that moved out in order to remedy your problem. You can run aeration fans on it. It'll drop the temperature for a little bit, but then it's going to come right back up because you haven't gotten rid of the problem. Many times as we're putting grain into the bin, we put it in at different temperatures or different moisture contents. So you're going along at 11% and we've got a load that comes in at 14%. We say, okay, we'll put it in our 11% bin. And on paper, that looks real good. It still looks like it's 11 to 12%. But what actually happens in your bin is that you've got all of this dry wheat, and then you've got this spot of high moisture wheat. And this is where you're going to start having the problem, and it grows and grows and grows. Here in Oklahoma, we have a lot of insect problems, especially in the fall. And so the insects love those moisture areas. They can detect those over anything else. and they will join in with the mold and make just a really big problem. So temperature cables can pick up some of those things. Other things you can use to sense are smelling your headspace. Everybody knows what bad grain smells like. You don't even have to be from the farm. You know what it smells like. So make sure that you get a whiff of what you're getting from the grain and make sure it smells fresh. There's also a method if your aeration system is such that you can get to the exhaust from the fan. In other words, it's pulling air out from the top down out through the bottom. If you can measure the CO2 of that air coming out of the bin, you'll notice some rises in it, and that tells you there's some kind of biological activity in the bin. We should not have biological activity in the bin. Grain doesn't do that if it's in good condition. So when you see that rise in CO2 from the exhaust of your aeration fans, that tells you that someplace in the bin there's a problem. So it gives you a hint to start looking for some problems. But the problems are related to moisture and temperature. If you can manage those two things, you've got this mastered. That's easier said than done, I understand. Fortunately, in Idaho, you get cold pretty fast in the fall, and you have some really hard winters. We don't. We can't get down to 65 degrees in our bins till well into the winter. So you're very fortunate in that respect. Once you get down below 65 degrees, where your grain temperature, core temperature is 65 degrees or less, most of your problems go away. Mold does not develop very rapidly below 65 degrees. Insects do not do any damage or reproduce below 65 degrees. So if you can use your aeration systems to pull air through and get down below 65 degrees, and then when you can step on down to about 45 degrees, that's a really good storage environment. And so then you're not going to get the big clumps and the bridging, the things that cause our bins to be hard to unload and cause people to have to go into the bins to fix the problem, to break up the clumps. So that's really what we see mostly in entrapments, is when we're unloading that bin to market and get ready for the next year. Then we can move into entanglements. And obviously that's not as what the experts say is it's as serious as an entrapment, but I'm here to tell you it can sure change your life and your family's life. So what we see with entanglements is that we are cleaning out the bin generally, and maybe we've got it down to where we can see the sumps or the hole in the floor that goes down into the unloading augers. If you're in that bin with the auger running and you don't have those sumps guarded, you're just really, really, really at risk. That's where we see our entanglements. If you're under OSHA, which most family farms are not, you aren't required to do everything OSHA says. Those OSHA requirements are a good tip, though, to remember. The grain doesn't know whether it's on a family farm or in a commercial facility. It acts the same. So following those OSHA tips the best that you can will help you stay safer. It's proven that it does. Some of them are very hard to do unless you have several people to work with, and we will talk a little bit about that in a minute. But if you can do the lockout, tag out, in other words, don't have your augers running when you go into the bin. That takes care of the problem of entanglement. You know, it can't happen if the auger's not running. It takes you a little more time, but it's going to take a whole lot of time if you get entangled. So it's a precaution. Now, if you have to have that auger running while you're in the bin, make sure you have guards over your sumps that keep you from stepping or falling down into those into that auger. We just want to make sure there's no way we can get into that auger system. You also want to make sure there's no way anybody can turn on the loading augers and dump grain on top of you either. So what OSHA tells us is that if we're going to go into the bin, everything except the aeration system and the lighting has to be locked out and tagged out. So that's where, if you've ever heard LOTO, that's lockout, tag out. And you put you de-energize your power, you put a lock on it, and it should have a tag on it that says whose lock it is. then you take the key from that lock and you put it in your pocket. You don't give it to a coworker, you don't give it to your wife, you don't give it to your kid or to your buddy. It's in your pocket. That way, nobody can turn that on until you're ready. And every person that goes into the bin does that. So they make hasps that go on your electrical panel or the arm that you're going to pull or whatever your mechanism is. There's a lot of different kind of locking mechanisms, but they make them that have several holes in them so several people can put their locks on there. If the fireman comes to rescue you, they're going to put theirs on there also. The fire department will not go into a bin if it's not locked out and tagged out. So that's an industry thing that's not just typical to ag industry. Every industry in the world uses lockout, tag out. So there are some pretty economical products available for you to get those. You can get them through hardware stores, online at any of the safety equipment stores. Not very expensive, but all of your workers and you need to have that available and use it. The lockout, tag out takes care of a lot of our problems. Now, if we're just unloading and you still got a lot of grain in the bin, OSHA tells us we can't go in there when the grain is over our heads. In other words, if we've got a slope of grain going up 20 feet up the wall, it's not a good time to be in there if you're going to work below the level of that top level of the grain. I certainly don't want to go in there if you have a bridge up above. That's almost always, when that breaks loose, it's almost always a death. We just can't get to you fast enough to get you out. If you're completely engulfed in grain, you've got about 2 minutes. I mean, it's a sad thing. I've done a lot of cases where this has happened, and it's a very gruesome death. It's just something I hope nobody in Idaho ever has to go through. It's terrible. So if you do find yourself being engulfed or entrapped, even if you think you're just only going to go to your knees, pull your t-shirt or your shirt up over your head. That way you can block your air access, your mouth and your nose and your ears and your eyes from grain going down into your body. When we look at the autopsies of these victims, there's grain packed in every orifice of their body. And I mean every orifice. It's every time you breathe out, grain comes down on your chest, and it's hard to get the next breath. But eventually you're going to have to get a breath, and the grain goes down into your lungs and completely packs your lungs, packs your eyes, packs your ears. The forces are just beyond belief when you're under that much grain. So it's almost always a recovery and not a rescue in those situations. If you're into grain to your knees, you're not going to be able to get yourself out. I didn't believe that till I tried it. I'd heard that all my life, but I just didn't believe it till I actually tried it. And sure enough, if you don't have a rope or some help from someone, you're stuck until somebody comes and helps you, just to your knees. So, and they're not going to be able to just pull you out directly. If you're to your waist, it's going to take about 800 pounds to pull you directly out. Grain just puts that much force on the human body. If you're up to your shoulders, it's going to take 1,600 pounds to pull you out. I don't want anybody pulling me out at 1,600 pounds. So that's when your rescue people have been taught, hopefully, and hopefully we can get up to Idaho and the northwest part of the United States and do some training. I'll tell you about our training in a little bit. But they will have equipment called a cofferdam to come in and put around you and start scooping the grain out away from you so that they can relieve the force off your body and actually help you out of the grain at that point. So that's what's going to happen if you get stuck in the grain. Now, the scenario is you're a farmer, you're going to go in and work in your bin, you're all by yourself out on the back 40, and maybe you didn't tell anybody where you're going that day, and you have to go into the bin to break up some clumps, or for whatever reason, go into the bin and you get up above your knees for whatever reason, or maybe some grain comes down on top of you. What are you going to do? Okay. There's a lot of steel bins that you can't use your cell phone in. You've got to stop and think about the communication aspect. OSHA says you have to work with a partner, and that partner stays at the outside the bin and is in communication with you through the entrance to the bin into the access hole. I realize, because I'm one of these two, you're a farmer out there working by yourself. Okay. If you can make a deal with one of your neighbors that you'll help him and he helps you, that's a really good thing. You can make those arrangements. If there's just not any way that you can have somebody there with you, even if they don't know anything about farming, just to be in contact with you so they can call 911 if something happens. If that's just not possible at all, make some kind of arrangements with your family that they know that you're going into the bin and that you're going to contact them every 30 minutes or so. The worst case scenario is when a wife calls 911 and says, Joe didn't come home for supper tonight. Where is he? And they find him in the bottom of the bin. Okay. So if you can stay in contact with someone on a planned basis where they're not right there with you, but they're in contact with you and checking in with you, you're checking in with them. That's not the best case scenario, but it's sure better than just not showing up for supper. So something to think about when you're working by yourself. OSHA sometimes doesn't think about what our real world situation is out in rural America. And that's a law that, of course, the elevator people, the commercial folks, they have much more ability to meet that standard than the rest of us. But I know when I'm out working, my family's out working, we're usually by ourselves. It's sometimes a spur of the moment thing that we go into a bin. And if you can just tell somebody you're going in, you're going to check back in 15, 20 minutes, that's worth a lot if you don't have somebody with you. So try to keep that in mind. Harvest time in our family, the kids love harvest time, and I do too. When I was a kid, that was the time when I played in the grain bin, I played in the hopper on the combine and in the trucks. But we handled grain at less than 1,000 bushel an hour then. Okay, that you're not going to get too hurt 1,000 bushel an hour. We handle grain in our commercial facilities up to 40,000 bushel an hour now. A typical one would be 5,000 to 10,000 bushel an hour. It's just so much more dangerous now. We're in a hurry. We do things without thinking about it. Kids do the craziest stuff, and you just can't let your kids be around the grain bins and in the truck. We had a farmer in Oklahoma. Grandpa took 2 of his grandkids to the elevator with him. Nice day. They were enjoying Grandpa. While he went in to talk to someone, they were playing in the bed of the farm truck. It was a dump bed farm truck. Somebody came out and turned that dump bed on and killed both those children while he was inside talking to the people at the elevator. So things like that, they can happen to any of us. So kids just don't have a place when we're handling grain. Over 16 years old, over 18 years old, be mindful to the responsibility level of your child and make those decisions. But it's just not a place for little kids to be anymore. It's not that kind of industry any longer. And that's too bad, because it was a lot of fun, but we just can't do that anymore. So I've rambled on a lot here. I want this to be a conversation. I know Brittany has thought up some questions, and hopefully we can cover some of those with you. If there's anyone online and you have some questions, be sure and type those into us. And I'd like to just answer questions now. It helps me to know what you want to know.
Okay, so I'll start, Carol. Back to the lockout tagout system. What would be the first step to implement that with my crew?
Well, you got to get the equipment first. So they make lock and hasp systems. So go out to M&M Supply or Kathy Supply or whoever you buy ag safety equipment from. Even your hardware stores will have information about lockout tagout equipment. But there's a hasp, and it has holes in it, and it has a set of locks and keys and tags with it. So first of all, get that equipment, and then sit down and visit with your employees or your family about why you're doing this. The reason we want everything turned off is we don't want our grain to move. Okay. Being caught in the flow is kind of, there's a movie out that says Caught in the Flow, and it's about a guy that's walking down grain, and the grain starts to move because the auger is turned on. And so it's just like being in swift water. There's no way, because we handle it so fast now, there's no way to keep yourself from being pulled into the flow of the grain. So we don't want any grain to move, not out of the reclaim system or being loaded into the bin. So that's what log out tag out is for, is to keep that from happening. And it also secures all of those energy systems so that nobody can accidentally turn it on. So you're in the bin and maybe you got it locked out and tagged out, but the key's still there. And grandpa comes by and says, oh, I know we're supposed to be, Joe must have just forgot to turn on this auger when he went in. And he turns on the auger. He takes the lock off of it and turns it on. And, that's not good. So we want that key to be in the employee's pocket. But explaining to employees why we do it is probably the most important step. Most employees, if they understand the severity of the situation, will do their best to follow the instructions. On a commercial side, most of our commercial sites train their employees for lockout, tag out, and one violation is too much. You're fired. Okay. So the discipline is the other side of the story. It's kind of hard to fire a family member on the farm, but they need to know how serious you are about this lockout, tag out situation. So first of all, get your equipment, then explain to your employees why you're doing this and what they need to do, and that key is their property until the process is done. Those are your steps. That kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, good. Oh, somebody's got a hand up. Matt's got his hand up.
Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, would you have statistics as to how often a year there is an incident?
Oh, yes. We average about 60 entrapments or engulfments a year, and about half of those will be deaths. So Purdue University does a good job of handling that data for us. It is key primarily to the moisture of the corn crop in the United States for the year. In 2009, 2010, we didn't have any dry corn to go anyplace. It was all wet, and we were rationing propane and LP and for the dryers, and it was just a really hard year. And we doubled that year. It's just directly related to the quality of the grain going in. But on a normal year, we'll have about 60 incidents, and about half of those will be deaths. If it's a bridge, I would say 99.99% a death. Everything else is at about 60% of a death. We don't have good information about entanglements. It doesn't get reported. But I know in my caseload right now, over half my cases are entanglements. So it's a big deal.
I think I know this, but can you kind of explain what an entanglement is?
That's when you step down into the auger below and you get your leg wrapped in there. Or it can be a piece of clothing goes down in there. We had a gentleman that got asphyxiated that way. It's like getting wrapped around a PTO shaft, only it's in a grain bin.
I remember covering an FFA safety speaker, and the speaker said the auger is probably the most intimidating and most important piece of equipment as far as safety.
That's very true. And it's the hardest to guard too. It has to be open to do its work in some manner. Someplace something has to go into the auger or it can't move anything. So we just don't want it to be us that goes in that auger. There's some really good guidelines as to how to build guards that go over the sumps. And OSHA has some of that, and contact me, I can send you the information, but it's based on how far the edge of the flighting on your auger is from the opening. So the closer that auger is to the opening surface, the finer the grid has to be in the guard. So if it's down here, you can get by with about 2.5 inches between the bars. If it's up here, gosh, you may have to go to 1/4 inch, depending on what that distance is. But guarding is so important.
Thank you.
Carol, your descriptions of some of the accidents and situations are really graphic and such a good reminder for all of the people listening. And I think that, you know, we mentioned earlier that farmers can get a little bit complacent with some of these safety measures, and hearing that hopefully will remind people that this is super important. And I hope that anybody listening will forward this along to all of their neighbors and family members. Would you talk a little bit about your training and trainings that are available for small organizations, for large organizations, and maybe where somebody would start with that and how often they should be doing it?
Sure. Let's kind of go backwards there. How often should they do it? OSHA says once a year. I think, in my opinion, that's not enough to keep our workers and our families really in tune. So going through it every 6 months may be a better time frame there. And to do some kind of hands-on training is more effective than watching a video. We all know that. If you're an our teachers can tell us that. Hands-on is always a better approach. There are a lot of trainings going on around the country right now. Unfortunately, the Pacific Northwest is not the area where a lot of them are available. Now, here at Oklahoma State, we have, through our fire service training, we have a semi-trailer that's got 2 grain bins, little tiny grain bins on it, and we pull it out to a facility, and we actually do 4 hours of classroom work that talks about all the things that can happen, monitoring air quality and all these things that need to be done, talk a little bit about grain quality. And then in the afternoon, we spend 4 hours burying people in those grain bins and getting them out. And so far we're 100%, that's really good. But it's a small, safe scenario. It's very well controlled. There's no way that we could ever lose anyone in there, monitor the air all the time. We like to work with farmers and co-ops and elevator people, but we also work with firemen. What we found across the United States is we don't have the ag community in our fire service anymore as much as we used to. They are clueless about the environment inside a grain bin. They're clueless about the electrical system in a grain bin. They're clueless about where an anchor point for their ropes could be in a grain facility. So we like to work with them as well. So if we get our OSHA funding, hopefully we'll get to the Pacific Northwest this next year. And that training is for FFA chapters, 4-H chapters. We can do some work with kids. It's primarily targeted at farmers, producers, and elevator people. So hopefully we can do that. There are some other commercial companies around the United States that can come out. There is a cost for that, where our training would be low cost or free, depending on our grants situation. Since Idaho and the Pacific Northwest is not really served by any of these groups, the best I can tell you is to go online. There's a lot of good resources online. There's a couple of really good movies. Silo just came out last year, and I know some of you have heard about Silo. That's a really good motivational movie. It really gets down to what it's like on the family farm. There's another one, and it's out on YouTube, and it's several years old now, but the group that does In an Instant, where they cover disasters that happen that are kind of unusual, they covered, and it was the only engulfment we know of that was they got the guy out alive, but they reenacted that. It's like 2 hours long. Very impactful. I live with this every day, and I sat down, just had tears the whole time. It was very impactful because they enacted it with the family, with the rescuers, with the guy that was actually entrapped or engulfed. He had broken through a bridge in corn, something he had done his entire life. That day, it just didn't work out right, and he was completely engulfed. He told us what it was like, what it felt like when the rescuers finally came and started walking down towards him. He actually went down another 2 feet, and how the terror of all of that. So it's very impactful. It also shows the fire department of what they had to do to get him out. And so as far as training, there's some really good information in that. in how they handled Eric and getting him out of that bin. I think the saddest statement I heard that whole entire 2 hours was one of their firemen said, "We just didn't know what to do." There is no fire department in the United States that should have to say, "We just didn't know what to do," particularly if you're in an ag community like ours. And so hopefully your fire department will have the equipment, the cofferdams available, and the training to go with it so they can help you. Hopefully you never have to use it, but when you need it, it's too late to go find that equipment. The average rescue takes 4 hours and 100 people. So your 20-person rural volunteer department is going to need a lot of help, and they need to know who to call. There needs to be a communication system available to them so they can get mutual aid support and set up this scenario. So I hope that helps you a little bit. You're unfortunately in an area where there's not a lot of training in this area available. So use the web until we can get up there to help you, and some of the other entities in the United States can also start doing the same thing. You handle a lot of grain up there, and I don't know why there hasn't been more training available to you there. Hopefully we can fix that.
How many people can you train at a time, Carol?
We've done as many as 40 a day. We like to keep the classes around 20 to 25 because we can spend more one-on-one time with you. We go over lockout, tag out. We go over bin entry permits. We go over how to make a ladder system if you don't have a tripod or that will work on your grain bin. We go over how to make a hoist point there. We talk about anchor points, what bins need to have in them to be safe. That's kind of a hard thing because most of us have old bins and they don't have anchor points built into them and all. So anyway, we can do as many as 40 a day, but 20 is optimal. And we work from little people up to old people like us.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Are there any other questions for Carol or anything else? Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, just if you were to tell a farmer, like is a lot of this because a farmer gets in a hurry, or is this like if you had like 3 easy tips?
First of all, keep your grain in good condition, as best you can. Take care of the grain quality problems early because it's not going to get any better. So mind your grain quality, first of all. Second of all, be prepared with the equipment you need. You need to have a harness on, you need to have some rope, a place to tie that rope off to. And then third, let somebody know that you're going into the bin. If they're not going to be there with you, tell someone. I just really hope you have somebody there to work with you, but if not, make sure they know where you're at. Take time. I know, and especially in harvest, we get in such a big hurry. Folks, if you're not with your family from now on, that's going to be worse. So take your time to do a good job and do it safely. You just can't afford to get in too big of a hurry. Keep your kids away from the bins. That's more than 3, but.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you so much, Carol.
Oh, thank you. And if I can be of any help, if there's any questions as people watch this, you've got my email address. Be sure and let me know. I'll get right back with you. We can even set up a phone call or something. I just want to give you the information you need for all your ag people to be safe and to do their job and make as much money as they can.
We appreciate that, especially keeping them safe.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for joining us, all of you who are able to get on. Obviously, harvest is busy, so good luck with that as we finish out harvest.
And be safe.
Yes, be safe. And we will see you next month From the Field.
Thank you from Oklahoma.